Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 drama. The cost cap saga continues with McLaren Zak Brown doubling down on his perspective that Red Bull cheated the cost cap regulations and as such maybe deserved harsher penalties than they did receive. Horner of course disagrees with this, but this is not a topic that's going to disappear anytime soon, and probably this time next year we'll still be talking about to some extent or another. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. So the cost cap stuff happens a couple of months ago now around October, and probably next October we'll have another cost cap saga about this year's spending, just like we had this year for the spending in 2021. Quick note on the testing that Ferrari and also Mercedes and some other teams have been doing some new tyres. I guess, yeah, wet tyres they've been trying to test out here, because the wet tyre was a key issue this season in Formula 1. It's just so bad that it can barely be used, such that if the conditions are bad, like, well, they usually just have to wait for inter conditions and try and use the inters as much as possible. So the wet tyre needs to get better. Hopefully they're going to do that. Let's talk Red Bull though, because of course last season, or in 2021 when Verstappen won the title, turns out they overspent by a couple of $1 million over the budget cap, and well, obviously all the drama was kicking off. Now the words from some teams at the time, especially Zak Brown from McLaren, reckoned, he wrote an open letter, maybe it was a closed letter, but it was leaked for some reason, so probably it was intended to become public, that Red Bull's breach of the cap constituted cheating. Now of course Brown called for penalties. A lot of the teams basically just wanted ahead of Christian Horner and the Red Bull guys, and turned out they gave them some penalty, not as much as some of the teams would have wanted, but a penalty nonetheless of that 10% reduction in testing time for the next 12 months for Red Bull, and a bit of a fine as well, but that is largely irrelevant to their pockets. Now of course Christian Horner responded at the time and said he was appalled at this shocking letter that accused them of cheating, because he reckons this was not intentional, it was merely some accounting, errors, let's say, on their part that led to them overspending, and it wasn't like they deliberately tried to spend more in order to make their car better, which was the initial implication, and might still have some merit, because Zak Brown has not backed down on this. Very recently he's come up with these comments, and people have asked him, like, look, do you stand by those comments on Red Bull cheating, or do you think actually, yeah, it was kind of a misunderstanding of the regulations with the FIA? But look, at the same time, at the year prior to 2021, they also kind of did a similar budgeting thing. The cost cap wasn't really in effect then, but they were doing the accounting processes to prepare for where the cost cap would actually get introduced. So there's arguably no real excuse for Red Bull to get it wrong. And Zak Brown stands by it. He says, when you break the rules, I think you've got many different ways to characterize it. One of those ways is to call it cheating, right? So he's not backing down on his perspective here. Goes on to say this, whether it's technical or financial, there's many ways to characterize it. I know that cheating is a strong word, but I just don't see any difference between breaking a financial cap versus having too low of a ride height, or whatever the case may be. So interesting points, right? Because like, if you were to lower the ride height of your car beyond what you're allowed to do, or put too little fuel in the car or whatever, you're going to get punished for cheating because you're trying to break the rules to gain a competitive advantage. Now, is the financial cap the same thing as the technical regulations? You could argue they should all be on an equal merit, and therefore if one breach would be cheating theoretically, then a breach across the board is cheating therefore. So yeah, interesting comments I think from Zak Brown. The thing to me is really that cheating kind of implies some intent, right? Like if there was no intent to break the rules, then is it really cheating? Because I don't know, cheating to me implies that they intended to do it and achieved their objective. Now, I don't know if they necessarily intended to cheat in this case, but they certainly didn't try to not overspend, if you know what I mean, because all the other teams, they made the cost cap no problem. Like, yes, it was obviously difficult for the teams to spend as little, especially, Mercedes and Ferrari, the teams that spent a lot previously, to narrow it down to that much, to fire all the people they had to let go of, right, make redundant. Obviously, it wasn't easy for them, wasn't pretty internally, but they made it work, and, they wanted to ensure they wouldn't overspend. All the other teams made it happen. Red Bull didn't make it happen, so it might not necessarily be cheating, depending on your interpretation of that term, but they probably weren't trying that hard not to overspend, and of course, that's the point, right, that maybe, they say, right, Red Bull or Christian Horner say they didn't use any of that overspending money towards their car, but, you can very equally say that, well, if you did spend all that money towards catering or whatever, then the other teams that also had to pay for catering therefore had less for their car than Red Bull did because they overspent. So I don't know what you guys think about this. It's obviously a bit of a grey area, and he goes on to say the following: if something is within the sporting, financial or technical regulations and you breach the rules, I guess you can call it a couple of different things. Some people in a more simplistic manner would call it straight up cheating and not really have this grey area. So I don't know, obviously Horner's not happy about the cheating terminology being thrown around, but it's not exactly entirely invalid given the situation that unfolded. Of course, the important thing for Red Bull Bull is the actual punishment they did get for it that probably Zak Brown still thinks should have been harsher. How much impact will it actually have on not just this year's car in 2023, but also future cars as well? Because, look, can Red Bull sustain this dominance in terms of the car they had this year into the next couple of seasons? That might be unlikely. And if it is, if they do fall back a little bit, what does that mean for Verstappen? Just because I haven't really ever heard a reigning world champion talk so much, and yes, he gets asked these questions, right? So it's not like he can choose what he responds to all the time. But he talks a lot about what he wants to do after Formula One, and he's already been in Formula One for a long time. Don't blame him thinking about his future career, but it seems like he wants to move to endurance racing basically when his deal is done in 2028. But who knows, right? I mean, even if, let's say, their car falls shy a little bit over the next few years, Verstappen might even retire before then. He might retire before Alonso. Like, okay, that's not going to happen, but, could happen, right? Who knows how long Alonso wants to stay around for. Probably next year's car won't be affected that much by these rules, but the latter half of next season going into 2024, that's when we might see this penalty start to actually take some impact on the performance of the Red Bull. But next season, they're probably going to have a very fast car, and they might even be able to drop a little bit more weight as well off their car, which is where they can unlock effectively free lap time that many teams are looking to do. Because the first year, the Red Bull, the Mercedes, other teams were significantly over the weight limits, and one of their key attempts for the winter is to remove every extra ounce they possibly can from the car. The Ferrari, though, apparently is looking very good. Rumours coming out from internally that the engine is fantastic and the aero is taking significant steps. So they might have a great car, but with Binotto gone and all the chaos there internally, do they have a great leader of that team behind the scenes? Do they also have a great strategy team? Well, we know they don't, and is it going to change anytime soon? That's another question. So they might have the car next season even better than it did this year, but they probably don't have the full force to be able to deliver a championship, I would say, as it stands, but it could mean they're at least still in the running for race wins and keeping the season competitive. Quick note on the Chinese Grand Prix, it's now of course gone and won't be returning for this season. So Zak Brown also goes on to say that he would like to see it only get replaced by the correct race. So the two leaders are Portimao in Portugal and Istanbul Park in Turkey. So those are the two tracks that are looking to replace it, and that there might be others on the horizon as well. But yeah, only if it works out, I suppose. But probably we'll get one of those two is my expectation as it stands. Quick note as well on the 2026 regulations. According to Nicholas Tombasis here, FIA's head of single-seater technical matters, he's talking about the next set of new regulations coming through in about 3 years time, 3-4 years time, and that is going to be with hopefully shorter and lighter cars. I think this is a key thing we want to see. Yes, we want the safety to remain the same, but the cars in the last few years are just absolute, they're massive, right? Compare them to back in the day. That incident that Verstappen and Hamilton had, if you go back 10 years, those incidents didn't really happen because you could actually fit two cars through those corners, whereas nowadays the cars are so wide you really can't. So yeah, I don't know, it's obviously a key intention for them in a few years time to try and make the cars shorter, lighter, and more agile and nimble, kind of like how it was back in what people consider to be some of the golden eras of Formula One. So just a quick update for you guys on that one. Also, this from McLaren, the super license confirmation. Now Piastri earns the super license, but you have to pay, the FIA must be raking in the cash, because you've got to pay the FIA $1,000 to even apply, actually to get the papers to sign the super license. Maybe it's 10 grand, I don't know. And then per season you have a license to compete in Formula One. You then have to pay an additional 10 grand, I think, plus another grand for every point you accrue. So it gets pretty expensive for some of the top drivers per season to renew this. And Piastri, of course, qualified for it, and now he's officially signed it and is licensed to drive for the upcoming season. Speaking of a Formula One driver, I thought this is kind of crazy. I thought you guys might find interesting. So Roman Grosjean, of course, known in Formula One for many years for various different reasons, went to join IndyCar not that long ago, and now he's going to be joining the World Endurance Championship driving for Lamborghini. So quite the move for Roman. So I thought it was pretty cool, and you guys might enjoy this one. And just to close out with this, with the World Cup going on, the WTF1 have actually been going through a World Cup and doing some elimination rounds. So as it stands, we've got Alonso and Sainz taking down Verstappen and De Vries. I think this is probably about right. I mean, Verstappen obviously is the best, but De Vries, I want to see more from him, right? Because, look, he obviously did that one race in incredibly good fashion in the Williams at Monza, got his 2 points for 9th place. But if there's any race that you would want to step into the Williams at, it's probably Monza, right? With the straight line speed it had. So, I think I want to see more from him. Alonso, obviously fantastic, and Sainz, very good. So I'd probably edge it to them. And then, of course, we'd expect more than likely that, England will probably go all the way to the finals here in this particular World Cup. Maybe not in the real deal, though. But very much enjoying your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.